for a time. Again, hit and miss. Some places will avoid them. Some more prolonged rain affecting eastern parts of Scotland, and particularly lively showers there for South Wales and the southwest. Otherwise, again, a lot of cloud cover. Another warm night, actually. Temperatures not falling far below 15 to 18 Celsius. And then we start off Tuesday with further showers, and actually quite a few showers will develop during the day, especially for northern, central and western England, Wales, as well as eastern Scotland. Drier to the far northwest and increasingly brighter, and largely sunny towards the southeast, with temperatures still reaching the high 20s, but back to around average elsewhere. High teens for Scotland and Northern Ireland, low 20s for Western England and Wales. Any showers and thunderstorms will be slow moving on Tuesday afternoon and into the evening. Falling onto dry ground, of course, that could cause some issues where the most intense rain does fall, and lightning strikes and hail and so on. Wednesday sees further showers and thunderstorms in the far south, but Thursday is a drier day for many before more rain in the west later.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing. My name's Tom Harwood. It's 3 o'clock and here's what's coming up on this hour. Sir Keir Starmer has unveiled his energy plan and has pledged to ban the energy regulator Ofgem from raising the price cap for 6 months. We'll be analysing his announcement in detail to see if it can work in reality and what it means for you at home. And as the migrant crisis intensifies, the Ministry of Defence has this morning confirmed more than 20,000 people have arrived in the UK this year alone via boats. We'll get the latest from GB News Home Affairs and Security Editor Mark White. And it's a year to the day since the Taliban seized back control of Kabul, as the US continued its chaotic withdrawal from the country. I'll be speaking with a military expert on the consequences. Give me your political briefing through it all. Send me your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk, or of course tweet me at gbnews.
A very good afternoon to you. It's just 1 minute past 3. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has set out his party's answer to soaring living costs. It's a £29 billion plan to freeze energy bills for 6 months. It's going to be paid for, in part, by a windfall tax on profits of oil and gas companies. And Sir Keir Starmer says families wouldn't have to pay a penny more than their current bills for their energy over the winter. Well, Labour claim their measures would reduce the rate of inflation by up to 4%. But the Institute of Fiscal Studies disagree. They've described the opposition's plans as an illusion. Ministers are coming under increasing pressure to do more to address the rising cost of living. Speaking to reporters today, Sir Keir Starmer said his party's solution to soaring costs was the opposite to what the government was doing.
I think in a national emergency like this, where we've got so many families anxious about paying the bills, it's right politically that we say every penny should go to reducing those bills, not to compensating shareholders. What I wanted to make sure was that today we could put a fully costed, credible plan on the table which actually answers the question, what will you do to help so many struggling households this winter?
Britain has become the first country to approve a COVID vaccine that targets both the Omicron and the original strain of the virus. The government says the upgraded Moderna vaccine has been carefully reviewed by its scientific advisory body. It's not clear yet who will be offered the booster or when. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says the jab will help protect communities.
Very good news for the UK population. The UK is the first place in the world to licence this new medicine. And it means that people get access to a broader immunity than would otherwise have been the case. And we know that the risk of COVID and indeed flu increases during the winter months when we get the colder weather. It's important that people boost their immunity.
Iran's foreign ministry says Sir Salman Rushdie and his supporters are solely to blame for the attack that's left the author with life-changing injuries. Rushdie's son says his father's feisty and defiant sense of humour remains intact. The 75-year-old author was stabbed several times on stage at a literary event in New York. He's now off a ventilator. The man accused of attacking him, 24-year-old Hadi Matar, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault. Today marks 1 year since the Taliban took Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. A national holiday has been declared in the country as citizens are encouraged to celebrate. The Taliban declared control over the city last year amid mass evacuation of US forces and refugees. Humanitarian aid into the country has been cut significantly since the Taliban took over, as world leaders demand greater rights for Afghans, particularly for women and girls. Defence commentator Jamil Jaffer told GB News he's concerned over terrorist groups reforming in Afghanistan.
An important day for the U.S. to mark the end of that military operation. At the same time, very challenging day because of the people that were left behind and our allies that were left behind, and that we continue to try to get out of that country. And of course, the concern that the Taliban will permit Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups to reform there in Afghanistan remains a significant concern with the recent killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri there in Kabul itself.
The Met Office is issuing a yellow warning of heavy rain and thunderstorms with the risk of dangerous flooding for most of the UK. Well, it's a two-day alert that begins today, and they're warning heavy downpours could cause flash flooding, disruption to transport and cause power cuts. The weather warning will stay in place for southern England until Wednesdays. Communities could be cut off by flooded roads, and the chance of fast-flowing or deep floodwater could cause a danger to life. An official complaint's been made to the police watchdog regarding athlete Ricardo dos Santos being pulled over by police for a stop and search in London. Mr dos Santos was stopped in the early hours of yesterday morning and filmed some of the encounter. The Met Police said its officers had thought Mr dos Santos was using his phone whilst driving. 2 years ago, the Olympic sprinter was stopped by police. At the time, dos Santos accused the police of racially profiling him and his partner. 5 officers are currently facing disciplinary hearings for that 2020 incident after the couple were handcuffed and details of their baby were stored on the police database. Nationwide Building Society is going to give £1,200 to more than 11,000 of its employees to help them with the cost of living. The money will be given to those earning less than £35,000 a year. That's more than 60% of the company's workforce. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head to Tom for this afternoon's briefing.
Welcome to the briefing. Now, firstly today, Sir Keir Starmer has pledged that people will not pay a penny more on their winter energy bills over the next 6 months than they were going to anyway, as he unveils Labour's plan for easing the cost of living crisis. Yes, the Labour leader says his party's £29 billion over just 6 months energy plan will save the typical family £1,000, get energy costs under control for the future and help tackle inflation. Well, the party says this will be achieved by preventing the energy cap from rising this winter, which would be paid for, in part, by an extra tax on oil and gas companies. So let's listen to what Sir Keir Starmer has had to say this afternoon.
Millions of people are struggling already in paying their bills, and in October those bills, those energy bills, are going to go through the roof, up from just under about £2,000 to £3,500, then up again in January to £4,200. And many people are going to really, really struggle. So we have a choice. We either allow the oil and gas companies to continue to make huge profits whilst every family suffers, or we do something about it. We, the Labour Party, are not going to stand by. We've got a fully costed plan that says we will keep those prices down. We will not allow these rises to happen, and we are going to have a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies to pay for it. And that is the right compromise, because we're standing with those people who are struggling to pay their bills.
What about in the longer term, if we get to, say, next winter and the price cap's still at, £4,000 or thereabouts, what then?
Well, this plan will take us through this winter, and there are so many people that are anxious about what's going to happen in the autumn, anxious that they can't pay their bills. So this is a real answer, a costed answer to them. The complete opposite of what you got from the government, who are saying absolutely nothing. True it is that in the mid-term and the long term, we need other plans. That's why a year ago I said we've got to start insulating our houses properly, bring the bills right down in the first place, make a massive difference. But we also need to absolutely have a sprint on renewables like solar, on tidal and on wind, so that we're not perpetually in this situation. We need to make sure we're not so reliant on the international market, which is driving these prices.
Would you continue with the plan, though, if it is the price cap is at £4,000 a year, and how would you pay for that?
Well, look, we've got to assess the situation in April when we get to the situation in April. But the question I'm answering is, what are you going to do to help all of those households that are going to struggle so much during the course of the winter? And we've put a costed plan saying we'll hold those prices, make sure they don't go up, have a windfall tax on oil and gas companies who are making huge profits they didn't expect to make to pay for that. Complete opposite of what you're seeing from the government. You've got Boris Johnson saying, I know there's a problem with energy prices, but I'm not going to do anything about it. And you've got the two leadership candidates quarrelling with each other, an internal fight about just how bad their record in government has been. We are stepping up and actually putting a fully costed plan on the table that will help people through this winter.
Sir Keir Starmer there speaking slightly earlier. Well, joining me now to discuss this proposal is the former editor of the Labour List website, Peter Edwards. Peter, thanks for joining us. I suppose the first big question is, the Labour Party say this is costed. There's been some dispute over that, given that part of their costings involve hoping that inflation goes down. Other parts of the costings are saying they wouldn't go ahead with certain proposed tax cuts. Now, on the one hand, the Labour Party can't say that that would be a saving, but also that the tax cuts that, for example, Liz Truss plans are themselves uncosted.
Well, they've set out three parts to it, which were extending the scope of the windfall tax, a Labour policy taken up by the government, to not proceed with some of the subsidies proposed by the Tory leadership candidates, and then to use the reduced energy bills to make a major saving on debt interest payments through having lower inflation. By contrast, you look at perhaps the unfunded commitments of Liz Truss, a Tory candidate, who said she'd scrap the national insurance right for social care, but still proceed with the social care reforms anyway, without funding. But clearly, as your question alludes to, there's been a lot of scrutiny on Labour's plans, particularly on one element of them today around the savings on national debt interest.
Yes, certainly. And indeed, this £14 billion they say they're going to get from not going ahead with various things that the Tory leadership candidates say they will go ahead with. I'm not quite sure if that fits into current budget plans. But the idea as a whole, let's move on to the philosophy of this, because this is a universal measure, a measure that costs on a month-by-month basis more than furlough did. Is it really right to be spending tens of billions of pounds on some of the richest households in the country?
Well, I'm not certain it will cost more than furlough, but we all know when it comes to means testing, and there is a case of means testing, absolutely, in some parts of the social security system, but we know means testing is quite a slow thing to do and quite complex and costs a bit of money in itself, although it doesn't detract from its merits. I think the issue we're in now is we're about to go into September and we're in the middle of a national economic crisis without being two-party political, because that's boring for viewers. But we've had a period of drift, haven't we? Because it's not just 1 month of Boris Johnson essentially serving out his time to retirement. We've had close to a year of drift. So I think my challenge to the government and anyone criticising Labour today is, couldn't the government, the Conservatives, take an action a year ago, because we need a solution from October when the price cap is due to go up?
Yes, although we only learnt that the price cap will be going up so much relatively recently, overtaking events. For example, these £400 payments that we're all expected to get to help through those bills, that was decided when the price cap was expected to be a lot lower. Interestingly, the Labour plan says that £400 payment would be scrapped as part of paying for this freeze. I suppose a net benefit, but perhaps a surprise. On that costing, though, furlough cost £69 billion for the entirety of COVID across 18 months. This proposal from the Labour Party is £30 billion for just 6 months. The IFS said this morning that it would likely have to run for longer than 6 months, otherwise you'd get an enormous jump in bills after that 6 month period was completed. So if we're looking at running this for a year, for 18 months, that's getting on for £100 billion. Is that really genuinely a realistic proposal?
Well, it's certainly popular, with 75% of Tory voters in favour of extending the windfall tax. But I would challenge some of the assumptions. For example, has any of this come as a surprise? Is it a surprise there's high inflation? Is it a surprise that energy prices are rising? Vladimir Putin's driving some of it, of course, with his evil act of invading Ukraine. That happened several months ago. One could argue that energy price rises have been locked in since 2014, when there was the first Russian invasion into Crimea. That's probably a bigger question for another day. But the expansionary and evil intent of Vladimir Putin, that sadly has a big impact on our domestic energy prices, the bills I pay and you pay, we have known about that for some time. And I guess, given that a lot of what Labour's proposed today seems to be relatively popular, and it looks like Liz Truss is going to win the Conservative leadership race, what is her funded alternative? The answer so far is nothing.
Yes, I suppose we'll have to wait and see. They've hinted, both leadership contenders for the Conservative Party have hinted they'd give more help, but you're absolutely right to say we haven't seen any of that detail for those on the lowest rung of the ladder, I suppose. Peter Edwards, formerly the editor of Labour List, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate your time here on The Briefing this afternoon. Now, new figures show that the number of migrants crossing the English Channel is already double the total for this point last year. A total of 20,300 people have now arrived in small boats since January, after a further 283 migrants were detected on Sunday. Now, GB News Home Affairs and Security Editor Mark White has sent in this report.
Arriving at Dover Harbour overnight, the local lifeboat with 50 people on board who'd been detected crossing into UK waters on a small boat late into the night. These crossings, which just a year ago were predominantly happening early in the morning, are now taking place day and night. The times they cross are now more unpredictable. What is certain is that the numbers crossing are growing rapidly. 20,300 so far this year. That number is double what it was at this time last year. Within days, it'll hit 21,000. And with the exponential rise in the numbers arriving, is on course to easily more than double the 28,500 who crossed in the whole of last year. For the government, this is a deepening crisis ministers seem powerless to prevent. since Boris Johnson announced a three-pronged plan in April to help tackle the small boat crisis. 15,000 people have crossed the Channel. Plans to house up to 1,200 asylum seekers here in the Yorkshire village of Linton-on-Ouse have now been abandoned amid a huge public backlash. And proposals to send thousands of others to Rwanda for processing have been mired in legal challenges and are unlikely to happen anytime soon. Still, both candidates for the Tory leadership say they remain wedded to the Rwanda plan and would consider extending it to include other willing countries, providing they can overcome the legal difficulties. Mark White, GB News.
And Mark White joins me now, magically, in the studio. Mark, you've been spending so much time down in Dover recently, seeing for yourself exactly what is going on, the scale of this crisis. Do you think that politicians recognise the real tragedy, the real risk to life and limb currently besetting our channel?
I think there's no doubt that they do recognise that. They know it is a real and growing crisis, but it's trying to get to grips with that crisis when you don't have the cooperation of a key partner, and that is France, in terms of taking back those who've crossed. If the French agreed to take them back, problem solved, because although they would have a bit of a problem for a month or two, once the people traffickers got to realise that sending them across the channel by small boats is no good because they're just going to get turned back, then that model collapses. And then all these people, thousands of people who are in the northwest shores and beaches of France, blighting communities like Dunkirk and Calais and Boulogne, they go.
It's the most frustrating situation in the world because so often the Coast Guard, the Royal Navy now, who guard the channel, can see these boats coming along. They'll follow them, they'll watch them, but they're not allowed to do anything to those boats, to touch those boats, to push those boats, until those people get to land. Is that a sustainable situation of affairs?
Well, I mean, the French, if they so desired, could, as the boats come off their beaches, push them back. But it's fraught with difficulty and danger. A small, overcrowded boat like that, sometimes with 50 people on board, including women and children, a lot of the time, if it got into difficulty, an upturn, then you could be looking at a tragedy. I'm sure that is in the calculus of the French authorities when they decide that once the boat is offshore, they'll escort it. If it gets into difficulties, they'll intervene. But if they don't, they're effectively escorting it to that halfway point to UK waters. Then our vessels intercept, and at that point, of course, the migrants are only too happy to come on board a British vessel because their ultimate goal is to enter the UK asylum system anyway. And of course, UK policy is that they will look to rescue, pick up these people because they are in an unseaworthy vessel in a busy shipping lane and lives are at risk.
Yes, I suppose it's a big difference to the Australian system where Australian water meets international water. In the Channel, it's English water meeting French water and there's nothing in between. We can't really operate in French territorial water, so it puts us in a tricky position. I wonder, though, if you are a migrant, if you are a genuine refugee even, trying to get to the United Kingdom, and you don't come from Ukraine, you don't come from a camp in Syria, and you don't come from Afghanistan, is there any way that you can get to the UK without using a small boat?
There are avenues, albeit, not necessarily that easy, but for instance, you could go to a British embassy anywhere in the world and look to try to claim asylum. You can, fly into this country, as people have done in the past, and I'm not suggesting that they should, because people have come in with student visas, with work visas, and then at some point claimed asylum. It's not easy. The system is set up, though, to deal with these countries in the world where there is, at that particular moment in time, a real recognised crisis, such as a war.
We opened a processing centre in France, in Lille, for Ukrainian refugees. Wouldn't it makes sense to some extent to expand that to help process some of those people in France, not just from Ukraine, but from elsewhere as well. Wouldn't that take pressure off?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very valid point. Why no processing centres in France? I think the British government would say, well, you do that, then it acts as a magnet and a draw for people to come there as well. I'm sure the French wouldn't be best pleased, but then the French do have a crisis there on the northwestern coastline anyway, with people trying to get to the UK. But yes, I mean, you would think that it perhaps makes sense that you could have these bureaus open there. You could apply, and if you are accepted, you're accepted. If you're not, you're turned away, and there's no point in trying to get over the channel, because then, having been rejected, you could be immediately returned.
I see. So once they're known in the system, then that's legitimate. So that's a really interesting point. Mark White, thank you very much for talking through that situation. I feel much better informed on that issue. Well, coming up, it's been a year since the Taliban seized Kabul amid the US's military chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. I'll speak to a former US Army lieutenant, not lieutenant, lieutenant general, to hear from his reflections about what that means for American power. That's after this.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GBNews.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable, and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Welcome back. Now, it's a year to the day since the Taliban seized back control of Kabul as the US continued its chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. The scenes outside Kabul airport appeared to sum it up at the time, the desperate attempts by many Afghans to flee their country as the Taliban approached. Today, the Taliban have been celebrating in the streets with a national holiday declared. Well, joining me now from Frankfurt is the former commanding general of the US Army in Europe, Ben Hodges, making him a lieutenant general, of course, rather than a lieutenant general before the GB News inbox starts to overflow with my mispronunciation. But let's first talk about this withdrawal, because, of course, there was a bipartisan consensus for withdrawal. The Trump administration drew up plans for the US to get out of Afghanistan. The Biden administration then implemented their own version of those plans. Was there any way that this could have gone less disastrously?
Well, it's quite a setup for the question. Look, 4 U.S. administrations deserve blame for how we ended. From the original, the Bush administration, the development of a strategy that then began to evolve over time, and no administration, including the Obama administration or the Trump administration, and then finally the Biden administration, formally changed the strategy and then explained it to the American people, the Congress, or even to all of our allies. And so that's partly how we ended up where we did. And of course, the decision by the Trump administration, I think the way you described it gives it too much credit. It was a surrender document to the Taliban without the Afghan government being involved. And so I think that put us in a position where the Biden administration would have to do something that they absolutely did not want to do, or pull out. Now, the manner of the decision-making to pull out without working more closely with all the allies in time, the failure to anticipate the number of refugees, certainly that blame could be laid at the feet of the Biden administration.
Mr. Trump says, after the fact, it must be admitted, but after the fact, Mr. Trump says that his plan would have involved getting out all of the equipment, would have involved an orderly evacuation, and then handing power over to the Taliban only once the last American boot had left Kabul airport. Is that credible?
Yeah. No, of course not. That's a ridiculous assertion by the former president. Note you didn't mention the Afghan government or allies in there. So any notion that somehow we could just pack all our stuff up and leave without doing this in a way that would keep the Afghan government able to defend itself, as well as working more closely with our allies who had been in there with us for so many years, it's ridiculous for the former president to assert that somehow his plan, we were just going to pack up and leave in an orderly way and have some sort of orderly transfer of power to the Afghans. This is not the 18th century where, the United States gets to make decisions over the heads of a smaller government. Now, look, I think there are several mistakes that we've made, and I have to admit, I have my fingerprints on 2 or 3 of them that led to this, the way we ended up. We built an Afghan security force that was extremely well equipped, very capable. I was convinced when I departed Kandahar at the end of 2010 that this was going to work. What I failed to see right in front of my very eyes was that we had built an Afghan security force that looked just like us. They had plenty of brave, intelligent officers and soldiers, but the model that we built requires thousands of contractors, endless fire support, endless logistics, and exquisite intelligence. When we left, the Afghans had none of that. So that was a mistake on our part, how we developed their security forces.
Yes, it was remarkable watching the Afghan army just sort of melt away over those weeks. Now, we've spoken a lot about the politicians, but it must be said that the US intelligence services did not expect this defeat to be so rapid. But judging by how fast the victory in Afghanistan was won initially, how the Taliban forces melted away back in 2003 with the initial invasion, should US intelligence not have imagined that sort of mirror image, that sort of poetic bookending of these couple of decades? Should that not have been anticipated?
Well, there's nothing poetic about this. And look, I also was guilty. I remember as things began to go bad a couple of months before the end, I remember telling somebody, Don't worry, you're not going to see Taliban in pickup trucks with black flags riding through Kabul, which, of course, is exactly what happened in just a few weeks after I said that. So I'm reluctant to point the blame at any of our intelligence services. And I have to say, it was not just U.S. intelligence that was here. We had intelligence networks working together from multiple countries, some of the best intelligence agencies in the world. We got this wrong. And I think it was less about the Taliban. It was more about we failed to fully appreciate the depth or the lack of willingness for Afghan people to defend themselves for their own government. And the final mistake, look, I was wrong on this too. Pakistan was never an ally. We, the U.S., we tried to convince ourselves that Pakistan was an ally. We were not willing to do what it took to make sure that they would not support the Taliban or give them safe haven. We were not willing to do that, and we paid the price.
So just finally in this conversation, what happens now? How do we as the West, or the US specifically, move forward from the mess of the situation that's before us?
Well, of course, one of the major lessons that we seem to keep relearning is before you embark on any kind of operation, we need to make sure we understand what the strategic aim is. You know, when General Nick Carter was my commander, he said, you always have to go to get to the desired end. What is the end you want? And then you work back to the beginning on how you should get there. And that would have to be the biggest lesson learned for us is, my goodness, we didn't understand the nature of what we were getting in. And as it changed and as objectives changed, we never really made all the proper adjustments, and we never brought along our own population. That's part of it. And of course, look, I'm 1,000,000% in favor of taking care of getting girls to school, women being able to have jobs, but that was never the strategy. And so if that's the strategy, let's say it, and then get all of our populations behind it and say, okay, look, and by the way, you're going to pay for it too. We're going to raise the taxes to pay for this. And then let's see if we can stick to that strategy.
Well, let's see how it all develops. It doesn't feel like it's been a year, but my gosh, I remember those weeks. It was the most extraordinary time. Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, former Commanding General of the US Army in Europe, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for the...
Well, now, next on the briefing, we'll be speaking to GBNews Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie, who is in Omagh to remember those who lost their lives in the Troubles. But first, here's the bulletins.
Good afternoon, it's 3:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has set out his party's answer to soaring living costs. A £29 billion plan to freeze energy bills for 6 months. Paid for, in part, by a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies. He says families wouldn't have to pay a penny more than their current bills for their energy over the winter. Labour claim their measures would reduce the rate of inflation by up to 4%. But the Institute of Fiscal Studies disagree. They've described the opposition's plans as an illusion. Britain has become the first country to approve a COVID vaccine that targets both the Omicron and the original strain of the virus. The government says the upgraded Moderna vaccine has been carefully reviewed by its scientific body. It's not clear yet who will be offered the booster or when.
It's a hugely positive step. The UK is the first place to licence this through the MHRA. It means that UK patients will have access to the broader immunity that the bivalent vaccine offers. So it's an exciting potential, and it's good news for the UK population.
The Met Office is issuing a yellow warning from today of heavy rain and thunderstorms with the risk of dangerous flooding. The 2-day warning covers most of the UK, and there may be flash flooding, transport disruption and power cuts. The warning will stay in place for southern England until Wednesday. The Met Office is warning that communities could be cut off by flooded roads, and floodwater could cause danger to life. The 4 suspects thought to be involved in the downing of the passenger jet Malaysia Airlines MH17 will be sentenced in November. Prosecutors say 1 Ukrainian and 3 Russian defendants helped supply a missile system that fired at the plane in July 2014, in which 298 people were killed. The Dutch court handling the murder trial announced the date of sentencing the suspects, who are still at large. The prosecution is seeking full life sentences. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.209 and €1.185. The price of gold currently stands at £1,471 and 3 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, 24 years ago, the Tyrone town of Omagh in Northern Ireland was rocked by a massive explosion. It was the biggest single loss of life during the Troubles and had no criminal convictions. 29 people died that day, and as you can imagine, the feelings around it still run deep. Well, our Northern Ireland reporter Doogie Beattie joins us from Omagh now. And Doogie, how is this really tragic event being remembered?
Well, about 4 years ago, on the 20th anniversary, they decided to scale it right down. Behind me you see MERS. Each one of those MERS represents a life that was lost here. As you said, 29 lost their life. Wreaths were laid here just at about 3:10. And you know, when you look back on that summer's day, I will never forget it. My son was born 2 days later, and what I seen and what people seen here affected them for the rest of their life. I know that I thought, what had I brought my son into? And you know, that bomb killed. It was a 500-pound bomb. It was the real IRA brought it here. They put it at the bottom of the street. It killed 21 immediately. 200 lay injured, and another 8 died in hospital. Amongst the dead, women and children shopping for school uniforms because it was so close to going back to school. One of those women was carrying twins. I spoke with Michael Gallagher. Aidan Gallagher, his son, died at 21 years of age.
He went into town with his friend, and they just went really only a few hundred yards from where we're standing. And he got the jeans, we know that, and he bought a pair of working boots. And then the bomb threat was phoned in to the police. In fact, there was 3 bomb warnings, and the police on the ground were starting to clear the street. Unknown to the police, they thought because 2 of the calls had mentioned the courthouse, which would normally be seen as a legitimate target. The police moved them further away from it, but unknown to them, they were actually moving it right on the bomb car. And at 3:10, the car detonated. And within 2.5 minutes, 21 people lay dead in the street. And it was the most wicked and evil act. And the group that carried that out was lifelong militant, dissident Republicans. And those people have never been brought to justice. There are failings within the British government and the Irish government around how intelligence was managed. Many of us believe that this was a preventable atrocity. We were assured by the Chief Constable, by the Garda Commissioner, by the Prime Minister at the time, Tony Blair, and the Irish Prime Minister, Taoiseach Bertie Ahern, that no stone would be left unturned, that those responsible would be brought to court with proper evidence. Yet here we are 24 years later and we haven't really moved one step forward. Not one person has been charged with murder at Omagh. This morning, when I got up and walked across the bedroom, the thought came into my head that Aidan is now longer dead than he was alive. He was 21 when he died and he's now 24 years dead. It shocked us to the core because we were all looking forward to peace. That's what we were promised. We made sacrifices in order to get that peace. We were willing to, the people that were involved in paramilitarism, we were willing to accept that they were going to gain some benefits from this. But all of us were going to end up with the prize of peace. And yet, when people describe it as the worst atrocity of the Troubles, it's actually the first atrocity of peacetime. It was the most wicked and evil act that anybody ever could have done. Those people planned and prepared and delivered that bomb from the Irish Republic. They spent less than 40 minutes in Northern Ireland and returned to the Irish Republic. So I believe that there is a huge onus on both governments, both the British government and the Irish government, to work together and give the families the truth.
Well, you could see from that man he is devastated, and you can understand that he lost his son, as did many here. And they really are looking for a public inquiry. They want that inquiry because you can argue that this wasn't part of the Troubles. The Troubles ended with the Good Friday Agreement on the 10th of April 1998. This was 4 months later. It was the start of a new time in Northern Ireland when we were all looking forward to peace. We were promised it, and that day in particular, it felt as if the world had stood still, and I'm sure for those that were affected, it definitely did, and it has done ever since. There is a lot of suspicion in and around this part of the world of why they weren't stopped coming across the border. The intelligence seemed to know it, and the guards, and it has been already on record here that the special branch here knew about it. They wanted to stop this car and the bomb coming in. Well, they didn't know obviously it was a bomb at that stage coming in, but the word wasn't given to them. So you've got to question to yourself, these were not combatants in any one shape or form. The Troubles were over. They just want the truth and they want to get to the bottom of it, and they have asked at the highest levels for a public inquiry. And it looks as if the new legislation that's heading through the House to stop stuff of the past and almost give an amnesty will not cover Omagh. So I think the families are happy enough in that they still have a chance of a public inquiry. But how far that goes politically, no one can tell.
It is the most extraordinary story that just as the province was promised that peace, just as that agreement was signed, as all of those political sacrifices were made, that violence continued. I wonder, what is the community's feeling towards how much this particular atrocity may or may not have been sanctioned by some of those who are now adjacent to elected politics?
Well, that is always the fear. And it was last week we buried David Trimble, who did give us 25 years of peace. But his own party split because they insisted that they wanted decommissioning of IRA weaponry, and they didn't want paramilitary prisoners out of jail until all the armaments came in. And the sorry thing about this was that Semtex, that explosives that was in that car, was IRA weaponry. It was the new IRA that was using it. It was a mistake in the peace process that happened. And yes, some of those may still be in politics now, and that may be why there is no public inquiry into this atrocity. I'm not making excuses for the bombers one bit. I would never dare do it. But I don't think they meant... there was a number of mistakes happened here, and people were hushed from one end of the town down into the other, straight into the bomb. But that was a lack of planning by bombers who were vicious people who don't deserve any sort of credibility whatsoever. There was no need for that. But you're talking about policemen on the ground that were just hearing information that there might have been stuff in the courthouse. It may have been the target, and that they pushed the people down this way. It was the most unfortunate day, and it has lived on in this town and most of Northern Ireland for quite a while, for 25 years. And Omagh in particular is not a very sectarian town. It's a very mixed town. It always was. It was a border town. It had a lot of unionists in it. It had a lot of nationalists in it, and it was a very agricultural town where communities, although they might have had their own sport and their own ways in life, they did live together and they helped each other. And it was, out of all the places that you would have seen the likes of this happen in Northern Ireland, I think that was the shock of why here.
It is the most shocking story, and still so many questions, as you so rightly point to. Were those phone calls, were they mistakes? Were they deliberately trying to misdirect? Who was involved? So much that could potentially be answered by an inquiry. Well, for now, Dougie Beattie, thank you so much for bringing us that news there from Omagh. Now, former Manchester United star Ryan Giggs allegedly head-butted his ex-girlfriend and threatened to do the same to her sister, a court has heard. The ex-Wales manager is on trial accused of controlling behaviour, as well as assaulting Kate Greville and her younger sister, Emma. GB News reporter Sophie Reaper has the latest from Manchester Crown Court.
We're into the second week of the Ryan Giggs trial here at Manchester Crown Court. So far, we've heard from friend and former employer of Miss Greville, Miss Elsa Root. She spoke of two separate incidents in which she noticed Miss Greville with bruises, one of which she said Miss Greville had told her she got when Ryan got physical with her the night before, and she'd been forced to take shelter at their friend's house. We then heard from Kate Greville's sister Emma, who was also allegedly assaulted by Mr Giggs back in November of 2020. She described the night of the incident when she was looking after the dog whilst Kate and Ryan had gone out together. She received a message from Kate saying, "Pack my stuff in the car, we're leaving tonight." Kate arrived home, shortly followed by Ryan, and a scuffle ensued. Whilst trying to separate the pair, Emma Greville said Mr Giggs' elbow touched her in the jaw in a get-off-me manner. Later, when Kate and Ryan were arguing again, it ended up with Mr Griggs using his head to headbutt her in the lip. Emma then said, "He turned to me and said, 'I'll headbutt you next.'" Kate then told her to call the police, who, when they arrived, arrested Mr Giggs. This was all part of the questioning so far from the prosecution, the side of Ms Greville, but we're yet to hear from the defence, so that is still to come today.
Well, the trial continues. Back to our main story now, and that plan from Sir Keir Starmer to ease people's energy bills over the winter. He says it could save the typical family £1,000 immediately. That's from expected increases rather than any savings from what is currently being spent. He says it would also get energy costs under control for the future and could help tackle inflation. Let's explore that proposal now with the energy expert, Malcolm Grinston. Malcolm, how would this price freeze for 6 months, how would it change the way that the market operates?
At the moment, there hardly is a market out there. Everybody's charging at the price cap. The supply companies basically can't buy electricity and gas for as much as it's costing them to for the price that they have to pass on to their customers. It seems that the idea is that the government will directly pay the supply companies from the amount of money that the Leader of the Opposition was talking about this morning. So that is money that, instead of coming out of the pocket of consumers, will be paid by the government to the supply companies, who will then presumably spend it on buying the gas and electricity which is being put into our homes.
Yes, and I think that's the big distinction here. These supply companies don't generate the energy. They're almost middlemen, and they need to get the energy. And the reason why all of this price increasing of the cap is going up is because that raw material is so much more expensive. The mechanism of the cap limits the amount of profit that those supply companies can make in the first place. So I wonder why we're attacking these supply companies when they are in themselves facing bigger and bigger costs. Shouldn't we be going one step beyond there to the actual generators of this energy?
Yes, the cap is in the wrong place. We've seen over 30 supply companies go broke over the last 18 months. This is not a sector of the industry which is making extreme profits. The profits are being made by the oil and gas companies, and to an extent the electricity generators who don't depend on oil and gas, so renewables and nuclear. And it's very difficult. These are international companies. There's an international gas price out there. And capping the international gas price is obviously a non-starter. So it's a complex issue. It may be that what the Labour Party is proposing is very close to being the only thing that would work. My personal view is, firstly, that high prices have benefits. They make us take energy efficiency more seriously, and they provide the investment capital for the next generation of equipment, which ultimately will bring the prices down again. So people like me who can afford higher prices, I don't think I should be cushioned from these effects. So I'd rather we were really targeting this on the people who will have desperate trouble feeding themselves and heating themselves this coming winter.
Yes, it does seem that this is remarkably non-targeted. An amount of expenditure by the government proposed by the Labour Party, which month on month would cost more than furlough cost during COVID, and tens of billions of that would be going to the richest households. I wonder, is there a way to do it in a more targeted sense?
Well, rather than cutting VAT on fuel, I think what you could do is firstly focus most of it through the benefit system for those who are in the most difficulty. But then I think you would need to supplement that with a discretionary scheme, maybe run at local level, because however you do it with benefits, some people will be missed out. You can't come up with a perfect scheme that's going to put the money in the pockets of the most needy. So for me, it would be along the lines the government has already done, maybe through a council tax rebate for the lowest council tax bands, for money through universal credit for those who are on benefits. And as I say, maybe a local scheme run by local authorities or someone locally, where needy cases who have fallen through the net manage to can go there in order to receive money that otherwise they wouldn't, but which they desperately need.
I suppose we're talking about all of this because this is about the immediate term, but this is, of course, a crisis caused by a lack of supply compared to demand. And if we're going to avoid really horrific conversations like this one about how much more debt we're going to plunge the country into or how much tougher everyone's lives are going to be, we really do need to start talking about how much more supply we can generate in the medium term. What are our best, quickest options there?
Well, I mebe, firstly, you can do something about the demand side. I think if we do have a large programme of insulating homes, that can be rolled out fairly quickly. There can also be, we can look for new sources of gas. There is a degree of flexibility in the North Sea reserves that we could look at. But actually, the problem with energy use, you can't do terribly much quickly because the investment horizons are decades. We should have been, when energy was very cheap 10 years ago, that's the point. We should have been putting the new kit in rather than waiting, as we always do, for crisis to come along and then we panic and it takes us 5 or 10 years to get back on an even keel.
Yes, a really terrible situation of short-termism as plagues all Western democracies, I suppose. Well, Malcolm Grimston, thank you so much for talking through that situation. I'm sorry we didn't come to a happier conclusion. Well, that's it for the show today. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. I'm back tomorrow at 9:30 and again at 3 all this week. Well, up next, it's Colin Brazier, but for now, I'll leave you with the weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. Some lively weather out there today, following the heat wave. Now the thundery breakdown, a lot of cloud, rain, showers, thunderstorms for many, but not for all. Some places are avoiding the showers and staying dry for the time being. However, low pressure has replaced high, and as a result, a change in the weather is taking place. Cloudier, cooler, rain or showers, as well as some thunderstorms. And the thunderstorms that we're seeing across the southwest, they'll continue into the evening. Further storms setting up across northern England, drifting into parts of eastern Scotland. More general rain here as well. And then a drier, clearer interlude for a time, with temperatures not falling that far overnight. A warm night for many, but further showers will push into South Wales, southwest England from the word go tomorrow, with some of these lively, risk of thunderstorms, and then further showers and thunderstorms will break out across the rest of England and Wales in places, but they will be hit and miss. Where they occur, risk of flash flooding, because of course that heavy rain falling onto hard ground could cause some issues. Where they don't occur, there's still the potential for 27 Celsius in the southeast, whilst it's much cooler and fresher for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Cloudy here, the rain petering out though later in the day, and clear spells with a brisk northerly breeze. Into Tuesday evening, further showers for a time across parts of England and Wales, particularly through this central swathe of the Midlands, Wales, southwest England. And again, where they occur, risk of some heavy downpours in a short space of time. But another warm night in the south, 18 Celsius, whilst it's much cooler for Scotland and Northern Ireland, 10 to 12 Celsius generally as we start off Wednesday. Brighter skies though for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England on Wednesday morning. Further showers to come further south, and the focus later Wednesday is on southeast England for those thunderstorms. Thursday and Friday look drier and brighter.